Paul Harrell, weekdays from 4 to 6. Learn more at paulharrell.com.
I had the pleasure of sitting down with former State Representative Mike Wilson. He did arguments in front of the Arkansas Supreme Court on general improvement funds today. When he got done, he called the program, and it sounded like this. All right, folks, please welcome back to the program. We have former State Representative Mike Wilson is with us, and we were telling you about this earlier in the week. Today is Thursday. Today, there were arguments in front of the Arkansas Supreme Court about general improvement funding. Former State Representative Wilson, what can you tell us about what went on in the courtroom today?
Well, today the court heard oral arguments, paper briefs that had already been submitted to the court. The court heard oral arguments, fleshing out to some degree the written briefs in this case, which is an appeal from the Pulaski County Circuit Court concerning the constitutionality of certain appropriation measures made to the planning and development districts across the state. This case concerned several appropriation acts to appropriating state money to Central Arkansas Planning and Development District, and that's what this case concerned today.
Just tell us where we stand right now on this. I mean, I've read some of the briefs, that are out there on this, and you make a compelling argument. You mentioned the 14th Amendment of the Arkansas Constitution, and I mean, you believe that if we're going to fund like a rural fire department, then the full body of the General Assembly needs to appropriate that and not, give it to a planning and development district.
Right. The transfers to the Planning and Development District allow, by their internal deliberations, they allow individual legislators to direct where the funds actually go. So, for example, legislator Joe Smith may decide that the fire department and part of his district needs state money, but and direct that money to go there, and a different fire department in the other part of his district receives nothing. Those directions and control by individual legislators violate Amendment 14 of our Constitution, which prohibits local and special acts, so that the direction of state funds by one person to any sort of charitable organization is and should be prohibited. That's the basis of my suit.
So let's talk about the past. You already did this once and you won.
Yeah.
And
right.
They essentially said, okay, in order to get around the court ruling that said we can't give this taxpayer money to individual legislators and have them go and get the credit, and I think it's just a slush fund for re-election to buy votes, essentially. We can no longer do that. So instead, we will, these are my words, essentially launder the money through the planning and development districts, and somehow we will indirectly still be able to achieve the same thing, still be able to get positive press out of all of this. So let me ask you this, Mike Wilson.
Well, your understanding is exactly correct. It is a money laundering scheme or artifice that permits individuals to direct where taxpayers' money goes, and that's exactly what has happened as a result of the earlier cases from some years ago, where the legislature directly transferred money. This is an indirect transfer utilizing the scheme of the development districts, which do what the legislator tells them to do. And that proof is in the record in this case, in this current case, over and over and over. So it's there. It's for the Supreme Court to decide
so
whether that's proper.
If the Supreme Court sides with you, if they agree with you and your criticism of this, do you have any suspicion that the legislature will again try to come up with some way to, undercut what this is?
Well, I certainly do. Public exposure of this collusion to utilize the planning and development districts, public exposure and publication will and has already resulted in stopping the improper transfers. For example, the governor, to his credit, made it known in this last session of the legislature, the 2017 session, that he did not want this sort of scheme followed. And the most recent session did not utilize that method anymore. Now, remembering that my suit began in 2015, it covered the previous General Assembly appropriations for that biennium, for that 2-year period. This last go-round, the governor made it clear that he did not like it. In addition, the recent developments in northwest Arkansas, which occurred after my suit was filed, the criminal indictments on the kickbacks and fraud, that has added fuel to the fire, although that's not my lawsuit. My lawsuit is a civil suit. The Northwest Arkansas proceedings are criminal proceedings out of Fort Smith, I believe.
Yeah. You did mention the governor, though, and in doing that, I'm curious. We're not doing GIF as we did it, but a lot of that funding is now going under the purview or the discretion of the governor.
Yes, the governor, under the most recent, the 2017 session, has the ability to direct or release funds for state obligations, not local obligations, as it is in my suit. The governor has a list in the Appropriation Acts or the option of funding a list of state needs. Colleges and universities are the notable examples, and other state programs, Medicaid, DHS, other areas that the governor is allowed under the current law to release funds as they're available. That's not the case in the suit that I brought.
Okay. In
the suit that I brought, the legislators individually decide utilizing the planning and development districts as a cover.
Right. So the question would be, the practical reality of the way things were done is that you have legislators, getting credit one way or the other, whether it was the old way of directly doing it or the indirect way using the planning and development districts. Do you foresee, if the governor's now in charge of giving money here or there, maybe a similar result to where you might have a headline in the paper that says Representative so-and-so fought really, really hard and got ASA or whoever the governor is to give money to this local area? We could end up with a similar situation. Do you disagree?
In a sense, it's perfectly legitimate, right, and proper for a legislator to advocate for programs in his local district. That's where all 135 members agree or permit it. It's unlike the situation that exists in my suit, where only one person decides. In other words, when the legislature appropriates funds for colleges and universities and gives the governor a list of which ones to fund first, so to speak, I can't complain about that. The Constitution allows that. The Constitution prohibits, on the other hand, the local and special transfers of state funds to anybody.
And so you're saying that the rural services, when this GIF money now goes under the rural services at the discretion of the governor, you're saying that wouldn't be a conflict?
Well, it might not, depending on how the bill is drawn. If it says to rural services for agricultural development programs at an experiment station, nothing wrong with that at all. That's a state state purpose for a division of one of the universities, maybe, or rural services or anybody, as long as it's specified in advance what the money is to be used for. Here, in the lawsuit that I'm involved in today, there is no specification as to how the money is to be used.
Right.
And that subverts, or actually prohibits, it makes it impossible for the funds to be audited, for example.
Yes.
How do you trace the accountability if you don't know where the money's supposed to go?
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's another fatal, I think, feature of the acts that I challenged in this case.
We're talking with former State Representative Mike Wilson. He was in front of the Arkansas Supreme Court today about this lawsuit. Similar cases he's already won. Of course, the legislature takes steps to get around that so they can still continue to, give away taxpayer dollars. And what I do agree with you that it is in violation of the Arkansas Constitution to be able to do this individually. So I got another question for you, if you have the time for it.
I do.
Okay. So in these economic planning and development districts, there is, from my understanding, there's unspent money. And I would like to know do you know how much money? And if you were to say the Supreme Court were to side with you, what would happen to that unspent money?
Well, if the court decides in favor of my position, it could order the refunds of any unspent taxpayers' money, could order refunds to the state. And that's one possibility. The court could also send the case back to the circuit court for the trial court for the same purpose. And it may be necessary to have hearings and see how much money's left and force the planning and development districts to account for any unspent funds. And it may go as far as to require them to return or refund the entire amount. That could really be significant because we're talking, in my case, $20 million statewide. That's a lot of money.
That is a lot of money. So do you know how much unspent money is sitting in some of these places right now?
In the case of Central Arkansas Planning and Development District, the one that I sued, the one that applies to me where I live, there was about $2.5 million unspent at the time the suit was filed. And whether they have tried to utilize any of that money or not, I don't know.
Okay. All right.
I don't know yet. Underline it.
So what happens next? When can we expect a decision from the Arkansas Supreme Court?
Now, this is just a real subjective observation, but from this morning's arguments, it seemed to me that the court was thoroughly familiar with the facts of the case, which suggests that a decision by the court may not be very far off. I would guess a matter of weeks or maybe even less. I don't think it'll be very long.
Okay. All right. Former State Representative Mike Wilson, we appreciate you coming on. I also appreciate your commitment to the rule of law and working hard in this lawsuit. I think it's really going to be good for the people of Arkansas, and so we can actually follow the law, control where our tax dollars are going.
That's our intention, Paul, and thank you for your public service.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Be safe, okay?
You bet. Thank
All right.
you.
Folks, we're going to take a break. Back in just a moment.